So today in Matthew chapter 16, we'll be picking up in verse 5. And as I said last week, I wanted to make sure I took the time to go through the book of Jonah because it's really difficult, I think, for us to truly understand what Jesus is teaching unless we understand what the audience around him thought, right? If we don't understand the scriptures and the culture and the time in which Jesus was teaching, it's really difficult for us to truly understand his message. And there's no greater example than this particular story right here. I love this story because it's funny to me. I love it. Anyway, so we're going to start here in chapter 16 and verse 5 where it says, when they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So they discussed this among themselves and says, it is because we didn't bring any bread. We forgot to bring the bread, and now he's warning us about the Sadducees and Pharisees. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 or how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't remember, how is it that you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now again, funny story. I love that story because I think sometimes, right, we always think that there's this idea in our society, in our culture that, right, we need to have like the smartest among us and only the greatest experts and these are the only ones really qualified to lead. And what I think is amazing is the ones that Jesus chose, they weren't picking up what he was laying down all the time, okay? Like, Jesus, there was probably another group that probably would have caught on a little bit better, but here's the thing. Jesus knew their hearts better than anyone, and Jesus knew exactly why they were going to be perfect. Because even though it maybe was a little bit difficult for them sometimes to understand what Jesus was getting at, he knew that once they got it, they would never let go, right? Like a dog with a bone. You ever tried to take a bone from a dog? It's hard. Especially a big dog. The bigger the dog, the harder it is because he's just got that much more power. You're not going to get it unless, well, if you got it well trained, that's different. But if you're trying to take a strange dog's bone, it's not going to happen. And one of the things that I love about this particular story and what they're learning here is this idea, once again, of yeast. Now, if you remember a while back, we were talking about salt, and this is one of the things I want us to understand about analogy, is that there's sometimes people who hear one analogy and they think this is the only way it can be used. And as I remember having someone tell me a long time ago, an analogy is a 3-legged dog. It can get along pretty well, but it's not perfect, right? An analogy only works insofar as it is to make the point. And so one of the ones that I've used before is I was talking about salt when we were going through the book of Judges, and we talked about how salt destroys. And this is quite clear, right? What happens if you drink salt water, right? You die. Well, first you go all paranoid and hallucinogenic. You start seeing things that aren't there, and then you die, right? But in the end, all of that high salt content will kill you. If one of the most famous stories about the Roman Empire is their war with Carthage, and they hated Carthage so much because Carthage was one of the few that was actually able to stand up to Rome, that when they finally defeated, famously, they salted the ground of Carthage, utterly destroying it for future generations so that nothing could grow there ever again. But at the same time, we have Jesus telling us stories about how salt preserves and keeps things ready for the future. And if anyone here has ever grown up, I guess, anywhere where refrigeration would have been more expensive, salting was a normal thing. I feel like it's probably still a normal thing. Well, it's definitely a normal thing in Newfoundland. Holy smokes, salt pork and salt beef. First time I ever heard this, I was like, oh, okay, it's going to be salty. No, it tastes like salt. There is no, you don't even taste the beef. It just tastes like salt. But that's what you need. Right? You need high levels of salt. Why? Because actually it's the same thing. It's that it's killing everything that would actually eat up eat up the meat. But it was a way of preserving and keeping things safe. Now, we've heard Jesus talk about before how a little bit of leaven goes through the whole batch and how it actually only takes a little bit of good, and that can actually spread through the whole thing. But here he's actually saying the opposite. But the same principle is applying. He's saying in this case, a little bit of bad teaching is going to ruin the entire thing. Right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. Here's the thing about the Pharisees and Sadducees to give them some credit. They said, we love God so much, and they committed their lives to God and the study of scriptures, and they wanted to know, right? There was obviously a difference in opinion. I don't make a big deal of that. I know some people do, but I think at the end of the day, they were committed to God, and they wanted to be committed to his truth. But the problem was, along the way, someone showed up, Jesus, who then started bringing some correction to their misunderstanding and said, hey guys, you've heard it said this, and you're right, that is what the prophets say, but your understanding is wrong. The problem is they weren't willing to change their minds, and here's the thing, when you have a little bit of bad understanding, when you have a small morsel of an excuse, it begins to corrupt your entire character. I think, by the way, this is why one of the big reasons why Jesus stresses forgiveness so much. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Forgiveness, I 100% believe, isn't about you and it's not about your enemy or the one who's done wrong against you. Forgiveness is entirely about you. Why? Because forgiveness is you letting go, releasing it, getting rid of the bitterness, the anger, the hate. Because if you hold on to that, if you bind it up inside of you, well, I'm sure all of us have met that person who they never let it go. And they just get more and more bitter and resentful and angry and petty. And it's awful. Right? Jesus doesn't call us to do these things, to be this way and do all this stuff for no apparent reason. He does it because he's trying to help us live the very best life that we could ever possibly have. And he's warning against the yeast, the small little morsels, the tiniest little bit of the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees, because it doesn't take a lot to corrupt the whole thing. We see this, by the way, in churches all the time. So here's the thing. People are saying, like there's this common idea in culture. People are saying, oh, people are enlightened. That's why they're leaving churches. No. That's not what's happened. Because here's the thing. Churches that stay true to the gospel, churches that will stay true to the word of Christ and who don't bend, who don't compromise, these churches sustain, these churches grow, these churches do well. Why? Because people want truth. But when you introduce compromise, you introduce failure. Now, I want to use an example of a real life example from New York City. Most of us here are old enough, except for the boys and Claire, maybe Chelsea. I think Chelsea, maybe even Ashley actually. Who remembers like the Ninja Turtles movie from the 1990s? You guys definitely do, because wasn't it Ethan that was like obsessed with it? Yeah. Right? And that was a great example of how bad crime was in New York City back in the late 80s and coming into the 90s. Crime was out of control, right? Crime ruled the city. There's a reason, by the way, why Batman is famously based out of Gotham, which is basically just New York City, and it's completely crime-ridden, and the mob runs everything, and things are really bad. But then along came this idea. Wait a minute. What if instead of only dealing with big crime, we deal with little crime as well? I can't remember what it was called. Was it called I think it was called Broken Windows or something like that. The idea was, if we go after even the little things, then we don't allow the big things to get out of hand. And so they pursued that objective and they went after it. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, in the 2000s, suddenly New York became one of the safer cities in the world for you to travel, and you could go and you could walk and you could feel safe, and you weren't going to get mugged or robbed, and things were going really, really good. And tourism exploded because things were going really, really well, because they realized if we take care of the little things, we don't have big problems later on. And here's the thing I think that Jesus is trying to get at us here. He's trying to remind us, he's trying to show us, guess what? It's not just about the big things, because how many of us here have made that compromise? We say, well, I know Jesus tells me I'm not supposed to lie, but maybe I'll lie this time and it'll be okay. Has anyone ever made that compromise in your life? Right? But here's the thing. And all of us, especially us that are older, who eventually had to pay for it, because guess what? It always gets found out. You never get away from it. Right? Eventually, you will have to pay. That small thing, the worst part is that, especially when it's a small thing, and you keep doubling down and doubling down and doubling it down, it keeps ballooning and ballooning and getting bigger and bigger, and suddenly you don't even realize what you're caught up in anymore. You've lied so much. And it all started as something really insignificant. We make compromises, we sacrifice because we say, even though Jesus said this thing was okay, I should avoid, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway because I know better. And why is this important? We're going to get into that in this next section here in verses, starting at verse 13. I love this section, mostly because of what comes after it as well, but we're not going to get there today. But verse 13, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, so whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And he then ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Right, we know why, right? It's not yet time. Because eventually, at the end of the book of Matthew, he's going to tell them, "Go out and tell the whole world about me." But it wasn't time yet. And I love this. This is actually still like a point of contention to this day. Why is there a difference between Jews and Christians? We believe Jesus was the Messiah, and they're still waiting for Elijah, right? This comes down to the crux of it. From here, it splinters off, and we have all of our difference out of that. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to this one idea, right? Some say that John the Baptist was the one coming to make the way for Jesus Christ, and others are still waiting for the second coming of Elijah. And I love this because we've talked about this before, right? When people say that the Gospels, Jesus never declares that he is the Son of God, right? Never from Jesus' lips do we hear, "Yes, I am the Son of the living God. I am one of the Trinity. I'm one of the Godhead." But Simon Peter does say, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You are the chosen one, the one who is coming like Moses before, the one who came like Joshua, the one who came like those who came during the times of the judges and the kings and King David. You are the one who is going to lead us and lead us into glory. You are here to save us." And by the way, this is why they cried out, "Hosanna." They were crying out, they saw who he was, and they said, "Please, Lord, save us." They recognized him. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, but Jesus didn't say, "I'm the Son of God." Okay, if someone came up to me and said, "Oh, Pastor, I heard you're an electrician," and I don't deny it, what am I therefore pretending to be? What do you think? You had your hand up, Trav. Yeah, you're lying. So either, this is where we come to this paradox with Jesus, right? And this is what C.S. Lewis was trying to prove to us. C.S. Lewis made this claim, right? He's either Christ or he's crazy, right? He's either Christ, the Son of the living God, the one that we have been waiting for, the Messiah, the one who came to do everything that he said he did. He's either that or he's crazy. And so we got to ask ourselves, okay, well, which is it? Because this is a really important distinction to make out, right? I mean, if he's crazy, none of us should listen to him. But if he's Christ, then he's the only hope that this world has. Now, I'm going to jump ahead in the story a little bit. I'm not going to read the reference, but it's because we all know it. We know what happens. right? Eventually, the disciples in their confusion, we see Peter, the rock of the church, right? The one that he just said, I'm going to build this church on you. Whatever you loose on earth, I'll loose in heaven, right? He's saying, you have all this power, all this authority. Peter, I give it to you. Peter, you see because of the revelation that God gives to you. And yet, who is it that denies Christ 3 times before he dies? It's Peter. Who is it that runs back to his old career as a fisherman instead of going around and teaching what Jesus taught him? It was Peter. Because despite seeing miracles, despite seeing signs and wonders, guess what? Elijah did those, but he wasn't Messiah. Elisha did those. He wasn't Messiah. We had miracles that happened in the time of David. We had miracles by Moses and Aaron and miracles that happened during the times of Joshua. But none of them were Messiah. So I can understand why you could see miracles and not necessarily make that direct link immediately. But what became undeniable, the very reason they would go on to their deaths, never recanting and believing forevermore that Jesus was the Christ, is the fact that on the 3rd day after he died, he rose again, never to die again. He rose again, and Peter booked it straight to that tomb, and he went, where is he? He needed to see for himself. He realized that Jesus was no longer there. For the next 40 days, Jesus would wander around teaching and preaching and encouraging those who were believers. And then he would ascend in front of a crowd of witnesses back into heaven. So much so that, if you remember the story, the people were in awe, just staring. They couldn't take their eyes away. And eventually an angel had to come along and be like, hey guys, he's gone. Now you got to get to work. See, we have a choice to make as well. Either we believe that guy, the one that Peter acknowledged as the Son of the living God, we either acknowledge him as having that power, that authority in our lives, or we don't. I know that seems really black and white, but that's the truth of it. And it's what Jesus was trying to warn us of here. Because here's the thing, when we make room, when we make excuses, and we allow even just a little bit of compromise into our faith, it'll have major consequences. Here's the thing, many of us here have made bread. You don't need a lot of yeast. Here's the thing, because in the interest of getting it done in a hurry, we'll take about 1 kilogram of water and flour and we'll add a teaspoon of yeast. But really, realistically, you could use less. But over time, it will leaven the entire batch. Jesus is giving us a warning, and Jesus is showing us who he is. Guess what? We got to be careful what we let in our hearts. We got to be careful about what we do. We got to ask ourselves, wait a minute, is this what Jesus would have us do? Because let me tell you, I personally have gone through this myself, where there was a lot of beliefs I didn't even realize I was bringing in to the church that came from the culture. And it wasn't until I forced myself to face it and go, wait a minute, what does the Bible have to say about this? What does Jesus want me to do about this? That I started to realize that I had introduced compromise into my faith. I had introduced compromise into my life. And I wondered why I was stuck in a rut. I would wonder why things weren't going the way I thought. And it's because, you know what? I was allowing the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees into my heart. I was allowing these things to come in. And it was ruining my entire faith. See, we see a lot of people that are hurt by this. We see faith that is broken by this. And it all stems from a small thing that started. But I want us to hold on to one truth, because maybe some of that is for some of us here. Maybe some of us have had that same kind of hurt. I know many of us here, if you haven't experienced that kind of hurt, you definitely know someone who's been hurt by the church in that same manner. But I want to ask you this. Just because the Pittsburgh Pirates suck at baseball, does that mean baseball sucks? No. Just because the Blue Jays lost at the 11th hour, does that mean that baseball sucks? No. right? Just because the Leafs will never win a Stanley Cup ever again, that doesn't mean that hockey sucks, right? It's still so good. It's something that we enjoy. It's something that's fun. And just because some Christians do some really sucky things, guess what? We're all broken people. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to screw up. We're going to hurt people along the way. But we got to remember, I'm not doing it to serve the church. I'm not doing it to serve all of you. I'm doing it because I want to serve Jesus. Jesus is my authority. Jesus is the one I look to, and it is him that I look for my guidance from. And I'll continue to look at his word and go, you know what, Jesus, continue to lead me. Despite anything that happens to me, despite anything else that goes on in this world. Because guess what? The church is not immune to these problems that Jesus is talking about. In fact, we're the very target of a lot of these problems that Jesus is talking about. And the reason I wanted to put these two pieces together is because we have the problem, but we also have the hope. The problem is it only takes a small thing to ruin it for everybody, to bring hurt, to ruin a life. But the hope we have is that Jesus Christ was more than a man. He was Messiah, Son of the living God. And he came here because he wanted to make a way for us. God doesn't want to choose wrath, but he will because he's just. God wants to love on you. He wants to show you mercy and compassion. And this is why Jesus came and hung on that cross, was for each and every one of us. So as we get ready to go to a time of prayer here today, let us, each and every one of us, allow that to just weigh on our hearts and say, you know what, God, help me to identify the compromises I've made in my heart. Help me to see the problems that I've let into my faith. Help me to weed it out that I might grow and prosper for you. Because if you want to be the very best for Christ, the only way you're going to do that is by seeking his wisdom and his guidance in your life and making sure you get rid of all that nonsense that's been messing you up.